all we're hoping to do is we've got an hour to share some tips and some tools to help you if you are considering, as an owner or operator, purchasing an aircraft, or even if you're an aviation maintenance technician and you work doing pre-buys or on GA aircraft, some things that you might do that would help a potential buyer, owner, operator. Remember, aviation is a collaborative sport. It's a team sport. We need to all work together. So something you learn, you might teach somebody else and make us all better for it. So by the time we're done, literally some points to ponder, some tools that would help you better prepare. That's a picture of the first aircraft that I rented, first aircraft that I soloed in, and first aircraft that I had an accident in. Oh, no, maybe not the accident, but okay. So here's some things to consider. If you're looking to purchase an aircraft, here's some things that we want to cover throughout this presentation. So this is just the little area to start with. So airworthiness and registration file, what is it? Where can we get it? And what's it going to share with us? So the airworthiness and registration file, if your aircraft is in registered, there's a file in Oklahoma City for that aircraft registration number. In that file, there's some PDFs, and there's a PDF of the airworthiness documents, which are typically 8130-6s or applications for certificate of airworthiness, as well as FA Form 337s. And hopefully, here's the part that we want you to hope for, is that any supporting documentation for any major alteration, so if it's an STC, hopefully the STC data package, if they send it to Oak City, if at a minimum, you would hope that any flight manual supplements for any alteration were included with that 337, because then you could always print out a copy later on if yours gets torn or tattered. And then in the event there are any liens, like a mechanic lien, it's going to be recorded in this file. And then the registration file is going to have bills of sales and, of course, the registration information and that kind of stuff. In the event that this file, you purchase it and it has a suspense file, you're going to say, well, what's a suspense file? So if the registry has had some issue with any of the documents in either of those two PDF files, then they're going to reach out to the current registered owner and they're going to try and correct that. Well, after they try, and have no luck, then they just put it in a suspense file. And at some point in time, it'll get addressed. And it might be because of something like this, like a sale. So we're going to show you where to get that file and kind of what you want to do with it. So if you're looking to purchase an aircraft, you're going to want that if it's currently unregistered. Let's talk about some regulatory requirements. You see a list there. There is a couple 43 regulations. Keep in mind that those are taking into consideration that the aircraft you're looking to purchase has a standard certificate of airworthiness. That's an FAA Form 8100-2. And then Part 43 would be applicable. So 43.9, that's maintenance, preventive maintenance, and alterations with the exception of inspections. And then 43.11 is how you record inspections. And then you'll see the rest of that list are operating rules. So that means if you're going to operate that aircraft to be regulatory compliant, you got to comply with those if they are applicable to the type of operation. We're going to talk about some airworthiness directives and some tools and tips to kind of come up with an AD listing. And we're going to make sure that we're clear that ADs can be applicable to the aircraft engine prop or appliance. We're going to kind of talk about where folks mainly fail when it comes to ADs. We're going to talk about service bulletins. We're going to talk about lightly on life limited components, serviceability paperwork. So in the event you buy parts or appliances or big pieces or little pieces, the serviceability paperwork that you want to make sure you keep. If you're buying an aircraft, is this a good time if you're doing a pre-buy? And of course, we recommend you do a pre-buy. If you're doing a pre-buy, is this a time to reweigh the aircraft? Because if it's a 25-year-old aircraft and it's had several paint jobs and it's had several alterations installed and removed, maybe they left wires and bundles and different things of the STC install in there. So is this really a good time to reweigh it to ensure that the weight and balance figures that you're using when you start planning a flight are accurate? Equipment list. Do you have an equipment list? Is it accurate and is it current in the configuration that the aircraft is in now? If you're going to do a pre-buy, and again, we already said we're a proponent of those, you might want to consider having a mechanic that's familiar with the type of aircraft you want to buy. So if you have a particular make and model you're pursuing, find somebody that's familiar with those aircraft. They know all the do's and don'ts. They know where all the little areas of problems typically are. Another great resource are type clubs. So again, if you have a make and model that you're pursuing, you don't have to wait until you get the actual aircraft if you're pretty convinced you're going to find a, if your goal is I'm going to buy a Cessna 172, you can get in those clubs now. And especially if your goal is by this time next year, I'm going to start my search for the right Cessna 172 to purchase. So there's a lot of things you can do way before you ever even find the aircraft and the N number that you're going to look at. But type clubs are a great resource. They are proponents of that airframe and they know where all the pitfalls are and how to fix the little weird things, as well as they're familiar with many of the alterations, so they can already review something that maybe you're considering purchasing. We talked about that airworthiness and registration file. So yes, the aircraft owner is going to have a box of records and stuff that, they're going to have for you to go through. So in addition to that, what you want to do, again, if it's N-registered, go to FAA.gov. You'll see the home page and you'll see the quick search block that says N number. Put the N number in there and hit submit. Once you've hit submit, it's going to show you who the current registered owner is. You're going to scroll down about 2/3 of the way on that screen, and you're going to go just below that airworthiness information, and you're going to see that little bitty hyperlink, and you're going to click on that. And that hyperlink is going to take you to a screen that's going to allow you to purchase the airworthiness and registration file for that aircraft. Do you have to own that aircraft to purchase it? No. So you can purchase this information from an aircraft you're looking to buy. So quick story, as I was in industry before I got into the FAA, company I worked for bought several competitors. And the first thing we did when we were considering purchasing one of the competitor air carriers, we went ahead and got a list of the aircraft they were currently operating under that certificate. And then we went to this site and we plugged in every N number and we bought every disc before we ever got to the aircraft or records that the current owner had. Because it's not uncommon for what Oklahoma City has and what the current owner has to not match. So it's definitely with regularity that it takes both of those files to tell you the whole story of that aircraft and its history. So then you're going to have the option of ordering this in on a CD or paper. So those are currently the only two options as of about a week ago when I last looked. If I remember right, the CD's $10 and the paper copies I think are a quarter a copy. So if it's a 30-year-old aircraft and there's several hundreds of copies in there, you decide what works best for you. I like the CD, even though that's kind of antiquated anymore, because once you purchased it, and it's a snapshot in time of the day that you purchased it. But then you can reprint any of those documents multiple times. So again, if one of your alterations has a flight manual supplement and it gets tattered or torn, you can always go back to this disk if it's in there and you can reprint you a new copy. So once you order that, it's going to take a little while to get to you. How long is it going to take? I can't tell you that because it depends on many variables, how many people have submitted requests for this type of airworthiness registration file at the period of time you did, how many folks are actually working them at the time you did. So too many variables to give you a time. So just go ahead and get it coming. As soon as you know the N number, get it coming. While you're waiting, again, we're saying if you targeted a make and model. Now, obviously, this is kind of thinking about if we know ahead of time. Even if you don't know, you can still do all these same steps once you know. So at some point in time, you're going to say, I like this aircraft or I like this aircraft, and you can do these steps. It's much easier if you've been able to do them ahead of time so you have time to start reviewing the information, because depending on how big that file is that comes from Oklahoma City, it might take you a while to review both of those or more PDF files that are on there. So while you're waiting, if it was a Cessna 172, grab the type certificate data sheet. My example just happens to be the 172. So the TCDS is 3 Alpha 1-2. Why you would want that is because the type certificate data sheet's got a lot of great information regarding the certification of that make and model. And you'll see in that block in the upper right-hand corner all the different models that are covered under this TCDS. So if you figure out which model you're looking for, it'll a lot of the TCDSs will have the serial numbers that were covered under this. So why is that important? So that could be important for a couple reasons. So let's say you're targeting an aircraft that might have also had a military application and it had a military designator. So if someone had one of those and is trying to pass it off as a certificated aircraft, typically the military aircraft did not have a standard certificate of airworthiness. So if they were trying to pass it off as such, you could pull this up and you could see that serial number isn't included. So it didn't come with a standard certificate of airworthiness. What did they do to get it a certificate of airworthiness? And they should be able to validate or justify what they did. So you would want to know that. In addition to that, here's some other things that are going to be listed on here. If an aircraft had couple different types of models of engines or props or makes of engines. So maybe one airframe put a Lycoming as well as something else on it. So they'll be listed on the TCDS. So then as you get the airworthiness registration file and you start going through that, and then you start working on the pre-buy inspection, if you find an engine that's not listed on the type certificate data sheet, it's not necessarily a showstopper, but what it should trigger in your head is it's not listed on the TCDS. I should have FAA approved data in one of these STC data packages that allowed for the engine and prop combination that's on here. So, or it's going to be the model that's listed on the TCDS. So the TCDS has got a lot of great information. So you can start reviewing that. And like I said, if you were thinking, if you're planning ahead, you literally could have the TCDS a year beforehand and you could already have reviewed it and be familiar with it before you ever go pursue that aircraft. Let's see. Yeah, so we kind of talked about validating the correct components. You can even see some TCDSs will even have a prop governor listed by part number on there. So again, great information. It's a great tool, and a lot of times it's underutilized. It's free. You can find TCDSs at drs.faa.gov under certificates, and you can find the one by make model, and you can print it out and save it as a PDF so that you've got it. And because of all the information, you literally can use some of that as a checklist, if you will. Okay, now let's say you get the registration and airworthiness file that you ordered from Oklahoma City a week ago or 10 days or whatever it was. So once you get it, open it up if you got the CD or paper and look at it and see how many PDFs. If it's a CD, it's going to be saved on there by PDFs. If it only has an airworthiness and registration, great. That means no suspense file, so we don't have any issues with some of the paperwork. So in the registration files, review that and just see that it shows the current registered owner, the person selling it to you. The airworthiness file is the biggie because if there's documents in there, the FA Form 337s and STC or field approvals or DER data, anything that's recorded in there, if it's got the data packages, you want to review that for accuracy and completeness. You want to make sure that the 337s are filled out the way they're supposed to be. Something to pay particular attention to is block 6 and 7 of the 337. Block 6 is the individual that did the work. Block 7 is the individual that returned it to service, basically stating that the work was done in accordance with the approved data, the installation instructions, installation drawings, and all that good stuff. A lot of times in the GA community, it's the same individual. Not only does Block 7 cover the individual for returning it to service, there's an approved, rejected blocks. Make sure those two, whichever one applicable, is checked, because if not, then the paperwork wasn't done correctly. And it should be addressed before you purchase the aircraft. So here's just a quick tip. Think about this as you're looking to purchase this aircraft. If you're going through pre-buy and it's looking like you're interested and you don't see any showstoppers, if you keep this list of things that you have identified that need to be corrective and you worry about them after you've written the check to the current owner, do you think that owner is going to be more or less likely to want to help you after they got their money? So the key is address these before you write the check. You know, it seems to be you have a much more cooperative individual to work with. I say that because I've done a lot of these on corporate stuff. So I've done bigger airplane, well, corporate aviation pre-buys for corporations and stuff. So much easier to work through those before someone's written a check. And that goes for new aircraft as well. So either way. We talked about reviewing the 337s. Last bullet. That's a great one. So compatibility of changes to type design. On FAA Form 337, Block 8, the header, it's going to talk about the installer needs to do an evaluation to make sure that this installation plays well with all the previous installations. Also on an STC certificate, it's going to say it's kind of the same thing. Well, for years, as AMTs, we were always told to do that, but there was never really a roadmap or a path to accomplish this. because of aircraft accidents that had happened with aircraft that had multiple installations and no evaluation because the FAA didn't come up with a way, they came up with Advisory Circular 20-188. And I believe that came out in 2016. So that was a recommendation by the NTSB because there was an aircraft that had several alterations done to its wing. I think there was two or three alterations. Each alteration changed. I don't remember if it was stall speed, but let's, for example, just say stall speed. So if you have three wing alterations, all with approved data in and of themselves, and they're installed on this aircraft. Each time the first one went on, there should have been an evaluation to see that that install didn't affect anything else or previous install. And then subsequently, the same thing should have happened for the second install and the third install. And if it was never done, and let's say those installs, because they changed to stall speed, had a flight manual supplement. So the flight manual supplements for each one of them said, hey, with this install, the current stall speed is going to be this. Well, if you've got three different that affect stall speed, three alterations that would each affect the stall speed, which one of those flight manual supplements is accurate? And the answer is we don't know because there was never an evaluation. That advisory circular, it gives you a path. So you'll see there, that's a copy of the certificate. It's going to give you, so you'll see the blue numbered items there. They kind of have some little hints how to resolve non-compatible mods. So there is a path to do that. This, again, is relatively new. When I say new, 2016. So it's still somewhat in its infant stage as opposed to some of the advisory circulars that have been out for 30 years. So because of that, if you are using this advisory circular, and you can use it anytime, you don't have to wait until you install a major alteration to perform it. A pre-buy is a great opportunity because if there's no record of it ever being done, someone should do it. And again, if you find two or three installations that conflict, use this AC to resolve that. But again, that's going to take time and effort. So again, does that factor into the negotiated price of the aircraft? Things to know. But because this is still relatively new, it's a great start. But there are so many people out there that could make it better. In advisory circulars at the end, there's a feedback process. So if for some reason you use this advisory circular and you had constructive criticism for it, fill out that feedback and send it in. It's the only way it's going to get better for all of us. So you can do that anytime. Even if you own an aircraft right now and it's never been done, you might benefit from using this advisory circular and then record it, right? Not only do you do it, but you need to record it somewhere. You could make a logbook entry or you could do it on an FAA Form 337, just say that we did it and forward it to Oak City so that there would be a record of it in that airworthiness file. Let's talk a little bit about our airworthiness directives. I don't want to beat this horse to death too much because I think most folks are clear on airworthiness directives. They are mandatory. Again, this says they're not suggestions. They're not. They are enforceable rules. In an AD, it will have what it's applicable to or affect. So it will cover make, model, maybe serial number, what it is, what serial range or part numbers. It might be a one-time or recurring AD. If it's a recurring AD, there's a schedule. It could be a schedule based off of cycles. So let's say it's a landing gear AD. So maybe it's on landing gear cycles that this is done every 100 cycles. So every time you land, that'd be a cycle. So after 100 of those, you might have to do the recurring AD. So if it is a recurring, you not only have to address the AD, but then you have to also include the next due. Could be by hours, could be by cycles, it could be calendar, whatever the recurring inspection interval is, you're going to want to put that in there. There's only one place that I know in the regulations that defines how an AD is supposed to be logged, and that's in 91.417. And it says exactly what's supposed to be in that logbook entry. Why do I share this with you? Because as you're doing a pre-buy, either if you currently have an aircraft or you're an AMT and you're making logbook entries, that regulation is how you should make your litmus test to make sure all your logbook entries regarding ADs are made. And here's a couple of parts in that typically get missed. The AD number or directive number is typically there, But then what was the method of compliance? So here's the one that's normally missed. You'll see a directive number revision date. ADs revise because we learn, right? So initially it comes out and we think it's only affecting this make or this model. And then we find out, 6 months from now that it's on three other models. So the revision might have went from the original to Rev A or Rev 1 or whatever numbering system they used on that AD. So when you record yours, you need to record that I complied with AD, this is the number, and revision date this. And if it's the original date, then put the original date so that anyone knows, so that in the event it revises, you can come back and continue to keep up with it. So again, 91.417, look at that if you're not familiar with it, whether you're owner operator or an AMT, that's the only place that says how ADs are supposed to be logged. If it doesn't look like that, you need to get it to look like that. So again, if you're doing a pre-buy, if those are not right, they don't meet the regulatory requirement. And again, 91 is an operating rule. So if it doesn't meet the regulation, should you be operating it? How do you get this fixed? So you need to figure out how you're going to get those addressed. But that's something you need to work out with the current owner that's selling it to you. Okay, AD's continued. So, yep, if again, we already talked about, let's say the Cessna 172 is the aircraft that you're interested in. So, if you want, and again, we kind of talked and said, look, if you're looking to purchase this aircraft, my goal is this time next year, I'm going to start my search for the perfect 172. So, if I want, I can start doing some homework now. I can create a master list of ADs because I know the make and model. So I'm going to pull up the make and model. I know by the TCDS, I know the possible engine combinations and prop combinations. The variable is the appliances, but that doesn't mean I can just neglect those and not create my master list, especially if I'm targeting certain avionics I want or certain avionics I plan to install. So, what does a master log look like? Well, it can look however you want. You can use an Excel spreadsheet. You can write it, on paper towels if you want. It doesn't matter as long as you could go to drs.faa.gov, look up the airworthiness directives, and you can plug in the aircraft. And it's going to say, okay, here's a list of all ADs applicable to the Cessna 172. Great. So then you create that list by number. And then you can put a short description of what they are. You can put if they're one time or recurring. If you're going to create an Excel spreadsheet, you might leave you a column that says logbook page. Because if you have this, it's going to take a little more work on the front end. But if you're looking at this and then you're going to create your log as you're doing your pre-buy, if you already know what ADs are against the aircraft, the engine, and the prop, and you have a list, then you can use that as your checklist as you're looking through the paperwork to see if all the ADs have been complied with. Do you have to be an A&P to do that? Absolutely not. A knowledgeable owner operator that has an understanding of what they're looking for can absolutely support the team by starting to look those up. So you would want to create one for the aircraft, one for the engine, and one for the prop, and one for appliances. The appliances, again, you won't necessarily know until you actually decide on this specific N number aircraft. So you'd create a list of all possible ADs against the airframe, all possible ADs against the engine, all possible ADs against the prop. You're going to list them all out on that spreadsheet, and then you can kind of start looking at them and learning and just get an understanding of what they are. However, your little cheat codes are, you could put stuff in there like, hey, this is a costly AD that you definitely need to make sure has been complied with if you're going to purchase an aircraft. And then you also might look at how old the AD is to say, hey, this has been out for 6 years. So there's probably plenty of parts, and you can always do the research and you can find out if parts are available beforehand. Because if it's not, while you're doing a pre-buy and that aircraft is wide open, if an airworthiness directive has 3 labor hours to get it done because you've got to take stuff apart and 2 of those labor hours are getting to it, but because of the pre-buy, you've already got everything open up and it's right there, you might take an AD that would take 3 labor hours down to 1 labor hour because you already have access to it because of the pre-buy. So you might want to make your list, and then as you're looking through the records, as you find things that have been or need to be complied with, you can then kind of decide, do I want to do this while we're in the middle of the pre-buy and make that as part of my negotiations? So you can work with those. and then keep that list. And then, like I said, if you're looking through the records, make sure that that last column, put the logbook page. Because then when you decide maybe 10 years from now you're going to sell this aircraft, if you've kept up with it, that's a huge tool for the next potential buyer, right? So it might take you a little more effort on the front end, but it'll come back your way later. Is there a requirement to have a master log of ADs? There's no regulatory requirement. The regulatory requirement is the 91417 to make a logbook entry. But you can see how helpful a master log is. So again, back to the purchasing competitors, not only did we get the airworthiness and registration files when I was industry, we had master lists for different makes and models. And this was a helicopter operation. So we had multiple types of turbine power rotorcraft, and we had master lists of an AS350 BA, B2. We had a master list for 407s, EC135. So anyway, we had those. So once you created it the first time, then of course the next time it's like, okay, I can plug in any 172 to this because I already have my list. The only thing I wouldn't have is my logbook pages and the actual for the aircraft you're looking at. Service bulletins. Are service bulletins important? Well, they are important because they're informing the owner operator that there's an issue that could be a safety issue that hasn't quite escalated to the level of AD, but is a known safety concern. So are they mandatory? Well, the answer is it depends. They could be, and they may not be. Typically, service bulletins are not mandatory for Part 91 operators. But if they're included as part of an AD, then that part that's included in the AD typically would be mandatory. So, for example, if I have a service bulletin that has the inspection criteria for the landing gear that's got a recurring inspection, so if it has the service bulletin says inspect the cross tubes for this at this interval, and you inspect it in accordance with Service Bulletin 1234, Section A through L. If the AD references that bulletin with that inspection, that bulletin, sections A through L, are now mandatory. If it says something along the lines in the AD of other sources or other resources are service bulletin this, that's not mandatory because they just reference it as another resource or more information or supporting information. However, that AD words it, that's not necessarily mandatory. But if the inspection criteria is, then that's going to be. But all that being said, if someone has complied with bulletins, the owner operator of the aircraft you're looking at has complied with bulletins and keeps up with the engine, the aircraft, the prop, and is taking care of bulletins that are not required. Does that give you a little insight as to how this aircraft has been maintained and whether or not it gives you a warm fuzzy about it? And I would say yes, because anytime you have an owner operator that says, I've got a known safety concern that hasn't quite reached the level of airworthiness directive and I'm going to handle it, that's awesome. That means someone is taking good care. Chances are, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, chances are it's a duck. So if all those bulletins are being taken care of, I'll bet your pre-buy goes pretty good because I'll bet they take great care of this aircraft. So things to consider. Flight manuals. So depending on the aircraft, when it was produced, it could have a flight manual. It could have a rotorcraft flight manual. It could have a POH or pilot operating handbook. Are they good sources of information? And the answer is absolutely. So depending on what it is and how old it is, there's stuff in there that it's going to have, whether it's going to be limitations, weight and balance. It might have emergency procedures for failures and that kind of stuff. It might have placards and markings for both internal or external, maybe just external. So there's a lot of great information. So first and foremost, pull that flight manual out or whatever book you got, pull it out, make sure that it's current and it's accurate to the aircraft that you're looking to buy. And when I say current's kind of a misnomer, if you will. You don't have to just, if it's that 172, you don't necessarily have to go to the manufacturer's website and find the 172 most recent flight manual, print it out and stick it in your POH or AFM. And the reason that's not always the best thing to do is think about this, whether it's the manufacturer of the aircraft or even an STC holder that had submitted a flight manual supplement in their STC. As we evolve and technology evolves and advances, the manufacturers as well as STC holders, they learn and they evolve. So let's say that the aircraft you purchased had a mechanical landing gear to extend the gear. So it has an electric motor with jack screws and a bicycle chain and gears to extend your landing gear. But as that production went on and we learned things, they got away from the old electric motor with jack screws and the bike chain and the little sprockets, and they went to a hydraulic system. So if you go to the manufacturer's website and print out the current flight manual, and the extend gear and the process or emergency procedures all covers the hydraulic stuff, and yours is the old bike chain, while it might be the most current on the website, it's not really current for yours. Current, by legal interpretation from the FAA, was current at the time. But so you do want to make sure that whichever flight manual or flight manual supplement, if it's an STC, is accurate for your installation, right? So that's what you want to make sure. Use the flight manual to check placards and markings. And also keep in mind, if you're trying to validate all the placards and markings that are required on your aircraft, not only would you look in the flight manual, look on FAA Form 337s. STCs a lot of times will have placards or markings that you'll install as you install that STC. Then, on top of that, if it was a one-off installation like an avionics package, a lot of times there are circuit breakers that have been installed or used if they were dummy plugs, and now they are placarded. So it might be a 2 amp circuit breaker labeled GPS. Well, once it was recorded in Block 8 of the FAA Form 337 that way, now it becomes a required placard. So make sure not only do you check all the placards and markings in the flight manual and all the placards and markings and all the STC data packages that should be with the records the owner supplies to you to review. And then also the FAA Form 337s for field approvals. You need to scour those and see if there's any placards that are required. Great. Last one is my favorite. Validate instruments and markings with those in the manual to include limitations. So remember, in the POH or AFM or RFM, there's going to be a section in their limitations. Think about the gauges on that instrument panel. So if they've got different limitations marked on the gauge, green marks, red marks, yellow marks, look at that flight manual and look at the gauge. So while I was industry, again, turbine power rotorcraft, large EMS operator, we had repoed Bell 206L3 from a doctor in Brazil that we had sold to that individual approximately 5 years prior. Operated outside the US for 5 years. When it left, everything was perfect, records included. When it came back, we didn't know because the records were in Portuguese and we had to figure it all out and get it deregistered there, registered, get it airworthy, and then we sold it. So I was assigned as the inspector, and I literally took the RFM rotorcraft flight manual with all the supplements for any of the alterations, and I went and I sat in the aircraft and I went gauge by gauge, instrument by instrument, and I made sure that the picture in the flight manual under the limitations matched what the gauge said. And guess what? I found a turbine out temp gauge that was wrong. Luckily, the engine came out and had a lot of engine work done to it anyway. But if not, um, you could have had a bad engine that no one knew because the limitations on that gauge were wrong. And the only way it was found is because I literally sat there, and it's tedious, right? This takes time. But because I was willing to sit there and do it, we identified that it had the wrong gauge and we got the right one. And by the time we sold the aircraft, we were pretty sure that we had everything the way it was supposed to be. But you had to put the effort in and someone had to sit there and do it. Don't be afraid to do that. Find that right POH, RFM, AFM, sit in there and look at all that stuff and make sure it all matches. We kind of talked about the airworthiness file and the 337s. Yeah, so I think I mentioned this briefly. It's not uncommon for the airworthiness file from Oak City and the records in the box that the current owner has, as he or she shares them with you, to not match. Sometimes it takes both of those to tell the entire story. Don't be too concerned other than look through both and make sure. And if it does jive, great. If it doesn't, how do you fix it? Find the ones that are not included in the airworthiness file and forward them to Oklahoma City to meet the 43 Appendix, I believe it's B for recording 337s, and just send it off to Oak City and have it included into that airworthiness file. Oh, it is B. Oh, heck, I had it there. So I got ahead of myself. Uh, and then once you have all those, right? You have the one from Oklahoma City and you have the ones from the owner operator. Make sure that what you are seeing is what's on the aircraft. So I did one annual inspection as an IA because I was doing corporate and I was 135 operator corporate stuff and a large 145 repair station. So I wasn't doing a lot of small GA stuff. So I did one annual. And on that annual, as I'm reviewing the records, I saw a major repair on the right wing. And as I have it all opened up and I'm doing my inspection, I cannot find this repair to save my life. And I'm like, okay, I've spent a while looking for it. So I'm thinking, okay, I can't see the forest for the trees. I got up, I went and had a sandwich or a soda or whatever. And I came back and I was like, I can't find it. So I basically just flagged it as I need to figure this out before I'm done. So I'm like, I'm going to just move on with the inspection and keep trucking. So I get to the left wing. Guess what? Guess where the repair was? It was recorded for the right wing. It was on the left wing. So again, ensure that what you have reflects what's on the aircraft and where. And if not, then how do you fix it? Yes, you can fix that. So you may have to do an amendment or an addendum to the 337 that recorded it. We're not really going to go too much in depth on that, but there is a way. If we have time in the questions, maybe we can cover that. If not, you can always reach out to your local FSDO. And then is there anything on the aircraft that you can find a record for? So in the event you find something you think it's a major alteration, the individual that's required to make that determination is the installer. So maybe the installer deemed it a minor alteration. So even though there might not be an FAA Form 337, there has got to be a 43.9 logbook entry, right? Because 43.9 says, you're going to do an entry if you do maintenance, preventive maintenance, or alterations, with the exception of inspections. So if they deemed it a minor alteration, there's got to be a logbook entry. So if you can't find a 337, don't panic just yet. Look through the records and see in the logbooks if they did that entry for a minor alteration. And then if so, maybe hopefully they did an accurate that describes why they considered it to be a minor alteration versus a major. Okay, so if we have an FAA Form 337, and we will for major alterations, we may or may not have a 337 for major repairs. And you're like, what? That's true. So if the major repair is done by an IA, you're going to have an FAA Form 337. If the major repair was done by a repair station, they can record the major repair on the repair station work order and not do a 337. So, note to self, if you want one, when you're negotiating the repair, ask them for the 337 if it's a repair station. If they say, nope, we don't do that, we're only going to give it to, it's going to be recorded in our work order. Great. Make sure you get a complete copy of that repair station work order, the entire thing. Not only this repair, but anything that they did, because they're only required to keep that repair station work order for 2 years. So after that, if they purge it, there's no record of. You just have an entry that said completed under repair station work order this. So keep in mind, if it's major repair, get a copy of that repair station work order in its entirety. Make sure that any of them have approved data. So if it's a major alteration or a major repair, it's got to have FAA approved data. So that FAA approved data can come in the form of a STC or supplemental type certificate. It could be a field approval. It could be 8110-3 DER data. DER is a designated engineering representative. They are an engineer. Guess who does STCs? Engineers. They just work for the FAA in an aircraft certification office, or ACO. So a DER can complete an FAA Form 8110-3, and if they check one of the boxes that says approve these data, then the installer can use standard practices to install it. So any FAA major alteration after 98 was required an ICA, or instructions for continued airworthiness, even a field approval, even DER data. So somehow, because the manufacturer didn't install that piece of equipment, somehow somebody has to know how to inspect, troubleshoot, maintain that new installation. And since the manufacturer didn't put it on, their maintenance manual doesn't cover this new piece of equipment. So there are STCs and approvals that were prior to 98 that had ICAs, but the drive from the FAA was, we really need to make sure every approved data has the ICA to give this information to those that are going to maintain it. So you'll see that second bullet. You need to make sure that if it was an STC, that it was purchased legally. You'll see the regulatory requirement 91403 Delta. So yeah, you got to purchase it legally. So what does that look like? What does permission or purchase it legally look like? Depends on the STC holder. So you either have to be the STC holder to use it or permission to use it. You get permission in several ways. So one example is one aircraft manufacturer that had a bunch of STCs would sell the STC. You would have a purchase order because you had to do something where you showed you pay for it. So you'd have the purchase order. And then in addition to that, you would have the STC certificate. On that certificate, it would have the aircraft serial number and registration number. And that was how they gave you permission, right? You would keep the purchase order as kind of supporting documents, but the actual permission was the certificate with the aircraft serial number and registration number on it. But that's how as an operator you had evidence. That's one way. So Bell Helicopter, or a company called Edwards, which was a subsidiary of Bell for years, they literally had a document that said, this is us, and we sold it to this individual. And then it had a couple more so that in the event it was sold from, so let's say you bought it and you were going to sell the STC, you were going to take it off your aircraft, you didn't like it, and then you thought, there's a value to that, so can I sell it? And the answer is, yeah, there's a value, but there might be a process. So they had a process where you had to go back to them and you had to petition them to say, I want to sell this and this is who I want to sell it to. And they're like, hey, great, for a fee, we'll do it. And the fee was way less than to purchase the STC to make it viable for them, but there was a process. So you need to make sure that any STC was purchased legally. How do you know? Well, now you know that you can look for that permission letter or purchase order or something like that. And then also I'm going to show you a little something on an STC certificate in a minute. That one covers ICAs. Review any all ICAs. Absolutely. What's great about the ICA? So if it's an STC or field approval, it might have a life limited component. Let's say it has something in that installation that was only good for 1,000 hours, and then at 1,000 hours you had to replace it. Or let's say it was a filter for the engine, and think of it as a big reusable filter that you had to wash, inspect, and then re-oil and put back in place. And maybe it was only good for 12 cleanings, and there was a data plate on the filter that you marked through every time you cleaned it. And then when you were done the last time, you got to use it for that additional time, and then you had to replace it. So some of those ICAs will tell you that. Let's see. Yeah, it's a maintenance manual for that. Yeah, we already talked about inspect, troubleshoot, repair. We already talked about the manufacturer didn't install it, so you need to make sure. Let's see, field approvals, STCs. Okay, ICAs, I think we covered that. We talked about 91403 Delta. That's the regulatory requirement. Again, they have to be purchased legally. So if you're doing your pre-buy and you have questions and you're not sure if it was purchased legally, make that a note. Somehow you're going to have to address that before you write that check. 8110-3. So I'm going to show you the certificate in a minute. So 8110-3 is one way you can get FAA approved data. So I show you this because remember I said you need to make sure that the block approved these data is checked. So to get a DER, you're going to have to write a check, right? DERs are designees of the administrator. They charge whatever fee they charge. Why would you use a DER when the FAA will field approve it? I always use the analogy of you have time or you have money. If you need this alteration relatively quick on your schedule, you need to hire a DER or the appropriate designee depending on what you're doing. So you need to hire the DER, have the data approved, and move forward. If you want to field approve it, we are happy to do that. FSDO is still field approved. The best thing you can do is use Advisory Circular 43-210, complete your field approval data package, submit it to your local FSDO. But keep in mind, it's going to get assigned to an inspector that's been trained, tested, qualified, documented to, and authorized to do field approvals. This is not the only thing that inspector has responsibility to do. This is what's considered an on-demand work request. And we triage like anybody else in any other job. We have priorities with deadlines and timeframes, and then things that move to the top of our list based on priority. So those come first. So we would tell people when they submit a field approval packet to our office, You've got to give us 30 days. It may be done way sooner, but keep in mind the inspector might be out in the field on a trip doing surveillance activities for a week. And then that same inspector might have training in Oklahoma City for 10 days. So there, from the time yours came in, if your field approval packet was submitted about the time they're going to the field, they're not even going to get it for close to 3 weeks before they even get a chance to do an initial eval. And if your packet needs to go to another supporting office like the ACO, then we're going to do our evaluation and we're going to forward it off to the aircraft certification office for their support. So again, if you're in a hurry, you might request a DER. But if you get a DER and you've written the check, now they've looked at the data, they've come up with a drawing and how you can install your whatever it is you want to install. They're going to fill out this form and you're going to get it. And there's an FAA order that tells them how to fill this out, and that FAA order is 8110.37. One of the things that order says, Block 8, purpose of data, the serial number of your aircraft, if you're paying for it, is going to be listed there. Then Block 10, you see the options for the DER recommend approval of these data, the top one, or the lower one, approve these data. If they check recommend approval of these data, guess what? You still have to do a field approval because they're not approving it. So you wrote a check and they checked the wrong block. So if you are paying for this, you need them to check approve these data because then you can install this with standard practices. But even though it's DER data, Block 8, it's still going to have to be recorded on a logbook entry 43.9. It's still going to have to be recorded on FAA Form 337. And Block 8 is still going to have the ICAO instructions for continued airworthiness. And there are some examples in that advisory circular, the 43-210, as well as the order that I would use to field approve something, FAA Order 8300.16. So again, if you are doing this, make sure that any approved data for in support of a major alteration or repair says approve these data and that block is checked. If not, you got more work to do. Okay, so here's an STC certificate. And this one I think I stuck with Bell. Yep, so this one's a Bell as well. So you'll see there's the models. Here's what's great about an STC certificate. You'll see my little note, it's a breadcrumb. It's the first breadcrumb in the trail. Why is that? So think of this. Any supplemental type certificate out there has to have some document that lists all the documents that were approved under this STC. And depending on the STC holder, they could call it whatever they want. These folks call it a master data list. That master data list will have a list of every document approved. So if there are installation drawings, if there are installation instructions, if there is a parts list that was approved, it's going to be listed under that master data list. If there was a flight manual supplement, it's going to be listed. This STC certificate made it easy on you because they listed the RFM or rotorcraft flight manual and they gave you the number. So if you are doing a pre-buy and you see this STC certificate, make a note. There's one of the flight manual supplements I should be looking for if this STC is still installed. So then once you get to that flight manual and you start searching for all the supplements to make sure you got them all, note to self, I should be seeing this, what is Teledyne batteries flight manual supplement. It might be a one pager, and this one I believe is, but that it's you're gonna know it, and you're gonna know as you're looking at the flight manual to make sure that that one's in there. In the event the STC certificate didn't list that out like this one does, you could go to that master data list and look to see if it had a flight manual supplement. So typically what happens when you purchase an STC, depending on how big it is and how many pieces and parts, if it's something small like this one, this was a lead acid battery, right? So you're getting rid of the other battery and you're going to put in a lead acid battery. There was just a few small pieces to this. So you've got the battery, you might have a bracket or two, you might have a cap because now you're not going to have the overheat temp indicator used because it's lead acid instead of NiCad. So there's few parts to it. So this one's easy. So what would have come would have been the battery, those little pieces and parts, and a manila envelope with the data package. The data package is what you need to be looking for. That data package, hopefully the owner that you're looking at buying this aircraft from has all those manila envelopes that have all the different STC data packages for all the stuff that's on there. At a minimum, remember the 91403 Delta, you gotta have purchased it legally. If you've got evidence that you purchased it legally, that's usually enough if the owner operator doesn't have the records to go back to the STC holder if they're still in business and get new copies. So that was the top half of the STC certificate. Here's the lower half. So if you see this in the records, you need to put a little flag, a little check mark of here's something I have to address. This STC certificate was not purchased legally because there's no ACO signature. So and that's by design. This was printed off of FA.gov. And the reason that's done is so that folks don't go in there and just print copies off and say, oh, I purchased it legally. So the majority of STCs on FAA.gov or DRS.FAA.gov, the signature blocks are like this. They're blank. So if you see that in records that you're looking at, mark that as I need to make sure that I have a certificate that's got the signature and the title of the approving authority. So this one was the LAACO, and you'll see up here in the STC number, SR01406LA. That LA is the LAACO. And so you would see an LAACO representative signature there under the title. So make sure that there's a signature. If you pull up an STC certificate in the records and it doesn't have a signature, immediate flag. I need to address this and make sure this was purchased legally. Just a quick note about props. Think about this. Props, it's dynamic as it's put on the aircraft initially, whether it's balanced statically or dynamically from the manufacturer. It's new, it's pretty, and it's good to go. Then it goes out there, and maybe whoever the owner operator is lands on dirt strips or grass strips, and they get a lot of nicks. And mechanics go out there, and I literally have seen aviation maintenance technicians with a file that looks like something a farrier would use on your horseshoes, and they start blending away. And remember, it's dynamic, so it's supposed to be balanced. So if you take material off of one side, to make it continue to be balanced, you would have to take the same amount off the other, or you would have to add what you just took off to the side you just took it off of, or you'd have to balance it and then figure out where, on the spinner bulkhead or whatever to balance it. And then not only do you potentially can create a vibe, but now not only that, there's a chord line on that prop blade. So when it comes out new, there's a measurement from the leading edge to the trailing edge. So, and then as you look in the prop manuals, it's going to have a minimum chord distance. So if you continue to blend it away over time, I have seen props that were below the chord limits because no one ever checked it. So do you think that might be something you might want to consider thinking about as you're looking at the prop? If it's going to come off in 30 hours and sent to an overhaul shop, great. But you still might want to know the chord limits because if it's not overhaulable, guess what? You're going to be buying a new prop. So you might want to know that as you negotiate a price. So there is a manual that's going to tell you what the limits are on that prop. Include that into your pre-buy. So again, no, I don't think anyone likes surprises. I don't. I don't like surprises on my birthday. I don't like surprises at Christmas. I don't like surprises. When it comes to an aircraft, and if you're spending money, you don't like surprises. So now you are going through the pre-buy, or actually, let's back up. Before you do the pre-buy, if you can, grab the current owner and let's go fly this. And before you go fly, review the flight manual, any supplements, weight and balance, equipment list, all that good stuff. Get a feel for what this aircraft looks like and what's supposed to be going on. Go fly it. Turn on, off, operate every darn thing you can operate. You obviously want to do as much of that as you can on the ground, but some things you just got to do in the air. So do as many of those as you can on the ground before you take off. Go fly. Make sure that you take and check everything. So when you come back, if you've got a list of things that you're going to need to have troubleshot, maybe you don't have them repaired because that's part of the negotiation to buy it, but you might want to have it the troubleshooting or diagnosis for whatever that failure may be, because some of those failures might be expensive to fix. And again, you would want to know that before you negotiate the final price. So you're going to make that list of anything that's inoperative. And then, yeah, you're going to have the mechanic who is working for you, not the seller. You want to troubleshoot those and kind of get an idea of what you think the expense. You can find out components and that stuff, but you want to know that. Um, then once everything the pre-buy inspection is complete, you're going to do that same flight after you're done. Because one, anything that didn't work initially should now work, and stuff that worked before should still work. You don't want any maintenance induced issues, right? So you're going to check everything again. So, an additional thing that seems to be underutilized. For some reason, folks don't ask if it's an IA they've never met or that they haven't seen in a year or two, that they don't ask to see their IA card, FA Form 8310-5. So it's okay to ask. Ask to see it. And you see the regulation there that says, shall keep it available for inspection by the aircraft owner. So by regulation, as an IA, if I'm working on your aircraft, I'm supposed to make that available to you. And you're like, okay, Alan, so I saw the card and it looks good, but how do I know that it's actually current? Great question. Go to FAA.gov. Scroll all the way down to the bottom of the home page and look to the far right column under Airman Inquiry. Click on that link. And if it's me, you're going to enter my last name and you're going to enter my first name. And then you're going to hit search. Then once it's done searching, scroll down a little bit below what you see on my screen or on that screen right there. And it's going to have my name and it's going to have my full name. And then you're going to click on that hyperlink. And then any certificates I have, it's going to show you. Well, let's say I have a pilot certificate, a remote pilot certificate, an A&P, an IA. You need to make sure that you're hovering over the mechanic certificate, and then you look for the IA listed below that. And then you'll see the IA certificate. When you see that, look at the date. So if it has a date of 325, that's the last time it was renewed. So if it has 325 today, if I was looking that up, that would mean it's current. That's not when it expired. That was the last time it renewed. So again, if it was renewed, it's current and it's listed there and it'll show that 325. Okay. So ask to see the IA card, validate that they're current. I'm not going to say we have some unscrupulous IAs out there that might have had theirs revoked or suspended or something going on and may have told the office that they lost it when we went to recover it, but it may happen. So the way you can check that is you can go to the FAA.gov website. Okay, so just a note, how can you do a pre-buy or even an annual on something that's dirty, that's got oil and dirt and accumulation over joints or rivets? And the answer is you can't. So it's supposed to be cleaned. There's the regulatory requirement if it's an annual. So it's got to be cleaned, right? Aircraft and aircraft engine. And again, you can't inspect something that's nasty and dirty. And you want to remove and open up everything. And if you're the potential buyer, work with your IA. And once it's all open, it's okay. It should be okay. If you were working with me and I'm your IA, I wouldn't have a problem with you with your flashlight and mirror, if you brought one, of looking in all the openings and all the inspection panels, getting familiar with this. Because if you're going to buy it, this would be your baseline, right? This is what you're going to start looking. So the next time the inspection rolls around for the annual and it's all opened up, if you saw it initially, you've got an opportunity to have a baseline to see how it's progressing as time goes on. So if you see something out of the norm, also remember the GA community doesn't require a second set of eyes to sign something off. So can you be that second set of eyes? Absolutely. So get in there, get familiar with your aircraft, and make sure that you're part of the team. So another note, if this aircraft has any type of pressure cylinder, an O2 bottle, a fire extinguisher, maybe a fire extinguishing system that has halon bottles that the halon goes directly to the engine or something like that. If there's a pressure cylinder, typically that bottle, that pressure cylinder has a life limit, whatever the life limit may be. And you'll see there's talk, I think some of life limits could be, the life limit for the bottle could be 10 years or 15 years. Typically, it has a hydrostatic test requirement. Typically, it's 60 months. How would you find out? Well, if the manufacturer installed the system, the manufacturer's maintenance manual and life limits section may have that information in it. So you're going to want to know when the last time that bottle was hydrostatic tested. The test is covered under 49 CFR Code of Federal Regulations and not 14. So it's different, but the valve and the gauge, if there's one on it, that's going to get tested too. That hydro test is for the cylinder. But while it's off, you would want that gauge or valve tested as well. And usually that's a repair station. So you would see an 8130-3 for the valve or the gauge come back, but not for the hydro. But there will be documentation. So you want to make sure that that's where that's at in its cycle if you're doing a pre-buy. Again, if it just was done, great. If you have all the paperwork, that's great. That's one less thing you have to worry about for whatever that cycle is. If not, if it's coming due in 3 months, while you're in that pre-buy, is this the time to pull it? Because you've already got 3/4 of the stuff out of the way. So again, something that might have 3 hours of labor, now you might cut down to one just because everything's out of the way already. Okay, so serviceability paperwork. So if anything that you purchased, you need to purchase from a known good parts source. If you don't have supporting documentation, should you? So again, think of all the pieces and parts. Old school philosophy was cradle to grave. You should have serviceability paperwork for parts on it from the manufacturer until, of course, it was such time that it was replaced. So if a component was replaced, and then think of even the small stuff. Because if you are buying switches or circuit breakers or something like that, you should not be going to AutoZone to buy that stuff. They need to come from a known good part source, and it's going to come with serviceability paperwork because aviation standards are much higher than the automotive industry. There's too many other influences on aircraft, so a lot of times aircraft stuff is somehow redundant or to a higher level. So that's the whole point of having the serviceability paperwork and the traceability. So you need to have that. So you want to keep anything that you just did during this inspection, and that just should be part of your records. There's an advisory circular reference there that's a great source of information regarding parts, aviation parts, serviceability type stuff. So as you have an opportunity, you might review that. Okay, I'm going to try and get this wrapped up relatively quick. Upholstery, so interior stuff, right? So in the event you're looking at an aircraft and it has new upholstery, or part of the selling point is recent upholstery, great, and that's okay. But you should be looking for burn certifications for that upholstery. You see in that picture right there, that individual's got several different materials. See the red, and you see the gray, and then you see the foam. And then, of course, he's got a sewing machine, so there's thread. So what's supposed to happen is once that is as an assembly, the burn cert should support the assembly. Not too many folks do that. ODAs, big organizations do. Most smaller folks will literally have an individual burn cert for the foam, an individual burn cert for the red leather, and an individual burn cert for the gray, and then maybe one for the thread. So you should be looking and seeing those at a minimum to have the burn certs for the individual, all the different pieces and stuff. So as you're looking at that, make sure they're in there. Lastly, so the certification standards in Part 23 define what the interior components need to meet certification wise. It might have an extinguish by time, like within 30 seconds, it has to self extinguish, or within 2 minutes, or whatever it is. Part 23 is the lesser standard. If you have a burn cert that says it meets Part 25 standard, great. Part 25 is for transport category aircraft. It's a much higher standard. So if you have burn certs that cover 25, perfect, no worries. Okay, let's see. A post inspection. Treat the first flight like it's a test flight. Set yourself up for success. You see that day VFR. Don't add a bunch of folks. Don't add a bunch of baggage. Don't add a bunch of fuel. Figure out how long you want to fly it for and put enough fuel, and then give you your reserve and go, because post-accident fires, as that states, are very real. So don't add more fuel, because really it is a test flight, right? So treat it as such and give yourself every opportunity to walk away at the end of it. Make sure that you know where your outs are. So if you've got an area and you're in an area that's got a bunch of agriculture and they just plowed fields, great spot. Start picking them. Find those areas. If in the event a major component was repaired or replaced, so we'll go back to rotorcraft. Let's say a tail rotor was torn apart. So because the tail rotor was tore apart and I'm doing a test flight, maybe it was replaced, maybe it was just overhauled, whatever was done. I might, before I go on this test flight, it would be prudent to pull open that rotorcraft flight manual, review my emergency procedures for loss of tail rotor, right? So do the same thing. So figure out what big pieces were taken off, and if there's emergency procedures, review those before you need them. Certificates required, registration, certificate of airworthiness. Here is an FAA Form 8100-2. This is a standard certificate of airworthiness. This is valid or current. You'll see block 6 there says, A, unless sooner surrendered, suspended, revoked, or termination date is otherwise established by the administrator, this airworthiness certificate is effective as long as the maintenance, preventive maintenance, and alterations are performed in accordance with 2143 and 91 of the regulations. So in the event, so it's current as long as it's maintained in accordance with the regulations. If someone gets away from the regulations, this is no longer current. So then, 91203, you're not in compliance with. Quick note, in the event you're walking around an aircraft that you're considering buying and you see pictures like this, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. This might not be a deal breaker if the price is right for the aircraft, but it does give you some insight, kind of like those service bulletins that, really say a lot about the individual if they're doing the service bulletins. This also says a lot about the current owner and what they're not doing. So again, your decision on whether that's a deal breaker, but again, it's giving you some insight as to how this aircraft is maintained. More of the same, right? Somehow this is going to have to be addressed. So again, if you are owner operator and you're an A&P and IA and you're willing to take a year and no worries, and you get this for a screaming deal, they literally give it to you or a very low dollar amount and say drag it off. Great. But again, you're going to have to make that decision because that's going to have to be addressed. Same with anything, right? Anything else, sleeve, hoses, you can always grab those hoses if they're fire sleeved. If they're difficult to inspect to see if they're leaking, but a lot of times if they are, those outer sleeves get sticky, right? If they start leaking. Obviously, any pool or fluid around it or whatever is also a good indication. Interior, right? We're going to talk about fire extinguishers if required, 91.513 if applicable. Again, is it serviceable? Seat belts, TSO tags. The seat belts are required to have the TSO tag. And it's going to have data manufacturer. Compass correction cards may or may not be there. If not, should it be? Look up the certification rules. So again, if it's normal utility Acrobat, Part 23, Aircraft 23, high 23 or numbers 23, 15, 100, something's going to talk about the correction card requirements. Is it there? Is it missing? Placards, are they missing? Is something wrong with them? Are they partially torn? If the cockpit looks like this, be aware because obviously that's missing. That lock, is that really correct? That it doesn't mean it doesn't work, but again, it's going to give you some insight, not to mention the bare wires next to it. Yeah, knob's broken, more broken. Yeah, wrong hardware. Yeah, someone mounted something to a yoke. Look, that anytime you mount something to a flight control or a seat or a berth, think STC because it's a flight control. So yeah, and is it in the way? What else is doing? It's just hokey. Inoperative equipment, 91.213. We'll talk about that. In the event you don't want to have to decipher that, you can always request an MEL. There is a process for a 91 MEL. In the event you pursue that, it's a great document because it removes all the ambiguity that is in 91.213 for whatever equipment can be inoperative and still operate the aircraft safely. And then there's a process, and that's basically what 91.213 is telling you. Some of the common problems with pre-buys, unapproved parts, entries for 43.9 or 43.11 for either inspections or work performed, maintenance, preventive maintenance, missing placards, seatbelt TSO tags are missing, out of date, torn. Equipment lists are not necessarily up to date. 91403 Alpha, owner operator of an aircraft, is primarily responsible for maintaining that aircraft in an airworthy condition, including AD compliance. So owner operator is required. 91405, this is a great one. Each owner or operator of an aircraft shall ensure the maintenance personnel make appropriate entries. So now we know 91403 says owner operator is responsible. We know 91405 says owner operator needs to make sure maintenance personnel make appropriate entries. So you think it's important for an owner operator to know the regulatory requirements for entries? And the answer is absolutely. 91417, we already talked about that. Those are the records that are going to be transferred. We already talked about ADs are recorded there, and that's how they're done. Maintenance records, those are the things that are listed. Last note regarding this, we don't care about Hobbs or hour meters. Your logbook entry should be aircraft total time, engine total time, prop total time. Things that you're going to look at 337s, 91-411 for altimeters. If you're flying FR 91-413 for transponders, ELTs under 91-207. If your ELT was installed under an STC or some other alteration, you might have an ICA that has an inspection, as well as the regulatory requirement under 91-207. So know how your ELT was installed and if there's more than one type of inspection required. Transfer of records, I'm not going to read it all, but that's the regulatory requirement, 91-419. Things to consider. Did I miss that one? Nope. Okay, so things to consider. Once you purchase the aircraft, make copies of those records. Every record you've got, again, it's going to take you some time. You're going to have to be committed. Don't be in a hurry. Get your fuzzy slippers and your favorite beverage and, somehow either pay somebody to scan them all in or scan them all in, make an electronic copy, and then decide which copy are you going to share with the maintenance folks as you have them do work. Are they going to be on the original copy or are they going to be on an electronic copy? Yeah. Okay, that's all I got.